Welcome to Drive the Daf. Clear, structured explanation of the daily Daf in 20 minutes. You can even follow in the car.
Shabbos Daf Kuf Mem and Dal. It is primarily about the halachas of squeezing. It begins in the middle of a complex proof as to what Rabbi Yehuda holds about squeezing, about liquids which came out of fruits on its own where they were not stored for any specific purpose. The Gemara then goes on to other random fruits, whether you're allowed to squeeze them or not, and whether we follow the custom of individuals as establishing a significant minig. That question takes us into a discussion about Hilchos Mikvaos, and that takes us around again to squeezing, and this time we'll be discussing the liquids that come out of olives when you squeeze them and when they're considered to be significant enough to make a psul on a mikvah, and then the Gemara will go to the halacha of squeezing directly into food and when that is a problem. We begin the daf with the last few lines of Daf Kuf Mem Gimel. The Gemara is in the middle of explaining a machlokes between Rabbi Yehuda and the Chachamim about juice which flowed out of fruits on Shabbos. Do we forbid you from using them lest you come to squeeze the fruit? So the Gemara has said that there are three levels of fruits. There's grapes and olives, which are commonly used, which people, the majority of them, are designed to be squeezed into oil and wine. There is no machlokes. Everybody agrees that you cannot use juice which flows out of them automatically by themselves on Shabbos. The middle level of fruits is berries and pomegranates. Those are commonly squeezed, but not so much. That is where there's machlokes, and Rabbi Yehuda says that you are allowed to use the juice that flows out of them on Shabbos by themselves, as long as you did not store those fruits with the intent to squeeze them. And the other types of fruits that are out there, there's no machlokes. Everybody agrees that you are allowed to use them. Now, Rabbi Yehuda, who says that you are allowed to use the juice which flows out by themselves, like we said, is only in the case where you store them specifically for eating. If you store them for no purpose, no specific purpose, you didn't have anything in mind, that would be the same as if you stored them for squeezing, and Rabbi Yehuda would say it's forbidden. This is what the Gemara is challenging. How do you know that Rabbi Yehuda says when you stored these fruits, the pomegranates and the berries, without a specific stated purpose, that we assume that that's considered to be for drinking? How do you know that no stated purpose is like drinking? And now the Gemara is going to launch into a whole other discussion, which will wind back around to this subject to prove that Rabbi Yehuda would say that liquids which come out of fruits with no stated purpose counts as if it's for drinking. Now, in order to prove this, the Gemara is going to go to a Mishnah talking about machshir. And the halacha is that there are 7 liquids, 7 types of fluids which count as mashke, as liquids which can make something tamei, that if they were to touch a fruit or vegetable which go from the ground, those fruits or vegetables are now called hochshar l'tumah, and if tumah falls on them afterwards, they will actually become tamei. The liquid doesn't make them tamei, unless the liquid itself is tamei. The liquid just makes them ready to be mekabel tumah. So the case here that's under discussion is milk that was milked from cow without intent. That's milk that flowed from a cow by itself. Is that considered to be a mashke that makes things huchshar to be mekabel tumah, ready to be mekabel tumah, or not? So the Mishnah reads as follows. First of all, about woman's milk, there is no machlokes. Everybody agrees that woman's milk which flows out without intent, that is considered a mashke, and that is machshir to be mekabel tumah. Cow's milk is a machlokes. If it comes out by itself, Rabbi Kiva says, yeah, for sure, it's a kal v'chomer. If women's milk, which can't be drunk by most people, only little children under age 2 are allowed to drink it, and therefore it's not such a useful drink, but that is still machshir to be mekabel tumah, even if it flowed out by itself. So then cow's milk, which anybody could drink, should certainly be. So on that, the Chachamim say, no, it's not true. It's not true. Women's milk is hochshar to be mekabel tumah, even if it flows out without intent, but cow's milk is not. And the reason is because women are more they have more tumah halachos than cows do. Another one of the 7 mashkim is blood, and blood that comes from a wound, if it comes from a human, like a woman, for example, that is a mashke to be mekabel tumah, but if it comes from an animal, it's not a mashke to be mekabel tumah. We learned that from Sukkim. Therefore, there's more mashkin tumah in women than there is in animals, and therefore the milk, which comes out by itself, is more likely to be mekabel, to be mashke to be mekabel tumah in a woman, from a woman, than from an animal. So he says, what Rabbi Kiva answers back, and he says, what kind of comparison? You cannot compare blood to milk. Blood and milk are two different discussions. The halachos of milk are much more chomer than the halachos of blood. If you look at it, if you milk a person, if you milk a cow to help heal the cow, because the milk is bothering it, so that milk is definitely machshir to be makabel tuma. If, however, you bloodlet blood from a cow for refuah, that's not makabel tuma. So you see, that's not machshir tuma. The halachos of machshir for tuma for milk are much stricter than that for blood. Therefore, you cannot learn from blood to milk. So therefore, your comparison's off. Mine is the only one which is correct, and therefore my kabel chayim is true. And we should say that if woman's milk is machshir to be makabel tuma, cow's milk should certainly be, even if it comes out by itself. Now the Chachamim answer, and this is the step which is going to be our proof, that you could really figure out the halacha here from the case of olives and grapes, that there's a difference between liquid that flows out of them on purpose, with intent, and liquid that flows out of them without intent. If it flows out of them with intent, then it is machshir to be makabel tuma. But if it flows without intent, then it's not machshir to be makabel tuma. And the Chachamim want to say that therefore milk which comes from a cow should be the same way. So now the Gemara makes its point from here. The Gemara says now, so here we're talking about olives and grapes, and we're saying that if it flows out without intent, then it's not machshir to be makabel tuma. If it's not machshir to be makabel tuma, it's not a mashke. If it's not a mashke, then Rabbi Yehuda should also say about it that it doesn't count as liquids. And what is this case of where it's not being where it's not intent? What is that case of not intent? That probably means where you did not intend it for anything. It flowed out by itself. You didn't store it for any purpose. And that's therefore exact case we're discussing here. Now here it's talking about grapes and olives. We were talking about berries and pomegranates, but it's a kal v'chomer. If grapes and olives don't count as a liquid if it flows out stam without any specific intent, then berries and rimons, which are less counting as liquids, as mashkin, should certainly not count as mashkin if they flowed out without intent. That is the Gemara's proof. And the Gemara's answer is no. When we said without intent, we didn't mean without any intent at all. We meant with specifically non-intent, where he said, I don't want this liquid coming out as it came out, and there was specifically where he didn't want it to happen. If he didn't have any intent, that would be the same as if he had actual intent for wine. That's the Gemara's first answer. And the Gemara gives the second answer here. The Gemara says you can't compare this over here. Here we are talking about where the fruits and olives are sitting in a basket with holes, and therefore the juice is going to flow down into the ground. It's going to flow down into the ground, then even if you didn't have any specific intent, you're not happy about it. It's just going to be lost and destroyed. That's why here it doesn't count as mashkin. But in the case of Rabbi Yehuda, it could count as mashkin because the grapes and the olives that are losing their juice will be saved, and it'll be kept, and it'll be useful. The Gemara now asks, we said earlier in Daf Kuf Mem Gimel, which we mentioned in our introduction to this daf, that in the case of other fruits, not grapes, not olives, not berries, and not pomegranates, there's no machlokas there. The Rabbanan agreed to Rabbi Yehuda that if the juice came out by itself, you're allowed to use it. There's no concern you're going to end up squeezing more. So the Gemara wants to know, how do you know that that's true? How do you know that the Rabbanan agreed to Rabbi Yehuda on that? So the Gemara brings the Brisa here. The Gemara quotes the Brisa. The Brisa says that if you have prunes or plums and quinces and uzurdin, which is a type of apples, that you're allowed to squeeze them l'chatchila on Shabbos. You're allowed to squeeze them, it's not a problem. But not pomegranates. And the proof to that is that in the household of Menashe Bar Menachem, they would squeeze pomegranates often during the week. So therefore you see that pomegranates is something that people sometimes do commonly squeeze, and therefore you're not allowed to squeeze them on Shabbos. So now, leaving the pomegranates aside for now, we saw that the prunes, the quinces, and the apples you're allowed to squeeze a chatchila. So the Gemara says, who says that this is the Rabbanan? Maybe it's Rabbi Yehuda. We're trying to prove that the Rabbanan agree. So Gemara says, listen, Rabbi Yehuda we only saw so far says that if juice comes out by itself, you're allowed to use it. Here it says you're allowed to squeeze it. So obviously, this is a step further than what we said. And this is going so far as to say that since people don't usually squeeze it, you're even allowed to squeeze it. If that's true, why would you assume anybody argues? Rabbi Yehuda says it, and the Rabbanan should also agree, and Rabbi Yehuda says you're allowed to actually squeeze it, and the Rabbanan say you're also allowed to actually squeeze it, and therefore you don't have a problem with this at all, and this proves that the Rabbanan also agree that if the liquid comes out, for sure, you are allowed to use it, and you don't have to worry about the Isser of coming to squeeze it. You're allowed to squeeze it, so then for sure there would not be a problem using the liquid which came out of it on Shabbos. Now the Gemara moves on to discuss this way it's seen that you can't squeeze pomegranates because the family of Menashe bar Menachem used to squeeze them even during the week, so you see it's common to squeeze and therefore it's frequently juiced and you can't use it. So the Gemara first of all says like this. The Gemara says Rav Menachem said that the halacha is like the house of Menashe bar Menachem. So Rava says, what do you mean the halacha is like him? He didn't say anything. All he did was he squeezed some rimons. And if you mean to say that the halacha is like the Tana that says you're not allowed to squeeze it because his family squeezes it and therefore it's common, just because one person decides to do something doesn't make it common. Why should that make it the halacha that it's considered to be a common thing to squeeze and therefore it's also to squeeze? So Gemara says, no. Even if a few people do something, that makes it considered a significant percentage and therefore it is usher. Now the Gemara is going to try to prove that this is true. The Gemara tries one proof to show that we care about a small amount of people, and then another proof to say that there's a different explanation for why we care about one person. So the first proof the Gemara says is from a Brisa, it's from a Mishnah talking about Hilchos Kelayim. The halacha is that you're not allowed to plant vegetables which you need in a vineyard. If you do, it becomes aser. So the question is, what about a type of thorns that nobody really eats, called koitzim? So the Gemara says that the Chachamim said it's not a problem, it's not food. Rav Elazar said it is a problem because in Arabia they grow it for the camels and they feed it to them. So you see, it's a vegetable that they're growing, so it's important. So the Gemara says, so you see, if that's what they do in Arabia, that becomes a significant halacha. So then the Beis Menashe is the same thing. So the Gemara says, what does that have to do with anything? Arabia is an entire region. Beis Menashe is one family. So the Gemara tries a different answer. The Gemara says, no. Okay, the reason is not because one person is significant. The reason is because we're afraid that you might be like Beis Menashe, and therefore you might consider rimon juice to be good. And if you do, and you want it, then for you it is considered important. Since you tend to squeeze it, it's a problem for you. Therefore we say exera that nobody should squeeze it because you might do it and you might need it. Now Rashi adds over here that the idea here is that it's being used to sweeten the fruit, not being used for juice, which is different than the other types of fruits which are listed in the Mishnah. That is not a problem at all. Those aren't used even to sweeten. Okay, now the Gemara says, where do we see this from? It's from Chizda. Rav Chizda is discussing mikvahs. What's about mikvah? It says that if beet juice falls into the mikvah, it passes the mikvah if there's enough beet juice in there to change the color of the water. So Rav says, wait a second, but beet juice is not a liquid. It's only a problem. It's not one of the 7 mashkin. There's only a psul to a mikvah if a liquid that's one of the 7 mashkin falls into it, or some type of mashka which people drink. If it's just a random fluid, that's not a problem. It must be that since this person went and squeezed his beet juice, so he considers it to be important, therefore the fact that it fell into the mikvah apostles it. And that's the same rule which we're applying here. Now, the Gemara says, no. We'll accept that, but as far as the mikvah halacha, there's other explanations here. It's not just like Rav Chizda said that this person squeezed it, therefore the liquid's important to him. Juices pasul a mikvah when they change the color. Nothing to do with adding liquids to the mikvah. It's not a din and 3 lugin here. Anything which changes the color of the water pasuls it. Anything which you're not supposed to make a mikvah out of, which you can't make a mikvah out of, even though it doesn't pasul the water because of pasul water, it does pasul it if it changes the color or the way the water looks. Now we have a Mishnah. Similar to this, the Mishnah says that if you have wine, vinegar, or something called moichel, which is a type of liquid that comes out of olives, which we'll soon discuss, if it falls into a mikvah and changes the color, it pasuls the mikvah water. Okay, now the Gemara says, what's this moichel? Now, moichel is something that comes out of olives. When they squeeze olives, there are a few steps in the process. First of all, you pile up the olives in the squeezer and just leave them there, and their weight creates heat, and a very clear liquid flows out that's not even oil yet. That's moichel. That is not machshir for tumah. That does not make things ready to be mekabel tumah. It's not oil. It's just olive juice. Later, you start squeezing it, you get oil out, and then after it's all ground up and munched up into a pile of olive mark, then some more clear liquid flows out. That's also moichel. So again, the first thing that flows out is a moichel, and the last thing is moichel. Except that this moichel is machshir to be mekabel tumah. So you got moichel at the beginning is not machshir, moichel at the end is machshir. So the Gemara says, who is this Tana that says that moichel is a real significant mashke, that it is a halachically important liquid? So Abaye says this is Rav Yaakov, because Rav Yaakov holds that moichel is always a mashke. You want to know why the one that comes out in the beginning of the squeezing process is not machshir to be makabel tumah, because people don't keep it, they throw it out, and therefore, even though it's a significant liquid, but it becomes insignificant. Rav Shimon has a different approach. He says, no, moichel is never a mashka. You want to know why the moichel that comes out at the end of the squeezing process, why that is machshir to be makabel tumah? Because there's definitely some oil mixed in though over there. So you have here machlekes between Rabbi Yaakov and Rabbi Shimon. Is moichel really a mashka or not? Our Tana, which lists moichel, one of the things that passes a mikvah, obviously holds that it is a significant liquid. It is a halachic mashka. Now, as you can see, there's no machlekes over here. They both agree as to what's machshir for tumah and what is not. The Gemara wants to know, where is there a machlokes? The Gemara says the machlokes is in a middle level where you squeezed the olives in the beginning of the process. So it's not pure water, but on the other hand, it doesn't necessarily have full olive in it. So if you hold that it's pure water, so this would not be pure water and wouldn't be an issue. If you hold that it's generally not machshir unless it has oil in it, so this doesn't have oil in it. So now the Gemara says this is one explanation of this Mishnah, but Rava has a different explanation. He says that this doesn't have to be Rabbi Yaakov's opinion. Here, the issue has nothing to do with being a mashke. This is a liquid which is not kosher for a mikveh, and it changes the way the mikveh looks. So once it happens, it is puzzled, just like Rav Papa said against Rav Chizda about the beet juice. Okay, now on to a different subject. Rav Yehuda says the name of Shmuel. A person's allowed to squeeze grapes into a pot, but not into a plate. That means as follows. The problem with squeezing liquids out of solids is that you're taking a liquid out of a solid. You're changing the material from being a solid to being a liquid. When it's in the grape, it's considered a solid. When it's in, let's say, the milk that's in the udder is considered a solid. You squeeze it out, it becomes a liquid. And that's the squeezing. If you squeeze it directly into food in a pot, so that's food to food. The liquid that goes into the food is considered a food, and therefore it's not a problem. Squeezing into a plate, though, even if you're squeezing into a food, is forbidden because people don't necessarily know what's in your plate, and they may think of a plate like a cup, and you're maybe making a drink out of it, and therefore you shouldn't do that even if you are actually squeezing it into food. So Gemara says, so this is that statement of that's Rav in the name of Yehuda Mishmor. Rav Chizda says you can learn from there, you're allowed to milk a goat directly into a pot as well. So Gemara says, hold on a second, I have a problem here. You're telling me that if it comes out and it goes directly into food, it's considered food. So then how come the halacha is that a zav, who's tamei, who milks a goat, makes the milk tamei when he milks it? Hold on a second. Let's say he's milking it directly into food, so it's food. So it's not liquid. It's never liquid. So then how does it ever become huchshar to be makabel tumah? The milk never becomes wet. Don't tell me that the milk itself is a liquid, because it's not. It's milking directly into food, and that's considered to be a solid. So Gemara answers, because the first drop of milk that comes out moistens the tip of the udder, and you need that to be there for the rest of the milking to go well, and therefore that drop is meant to stay liquid. So that drop is not food, and that is what is machshir every other bit of milk that comes out to be machshir to be makabel tumah, and that's why even though it's considered to be food afterwards, it's not considered to be a liquid, it's considered to be a solid. That's why it was already became wet through that drop that's on the tip of the udder, which itself is meant to stay liquid, and therefore is machshir to be makabel.
Drive the Daf is a project of the Grand Woodlands Shul and is presented by Rabbi Yitzchak Landa. Find us on YouTube or subscribe to daily emails by emailing drivethedaf@gmail.com.